Ephesians chapter 2, God's glorious grace. We're in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 5 to 7. Listen to it with me. Even when we were dead in our trespasses, God made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. Now, this all started when we go back in the past. And the first three verses of this chapter says, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. You followed the course of this world. You followed the prince of the power of the air. You were disobedient. You were deceived. You were so depraved. And then you were a child of wrath like the rest of mankind. But God, verse 4, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us. Verse 5, even when we were dead in our trespasses. So God did this when we couldn't do anything. What did he do? Made us alive together with Christ, literally made us co-alive with Christ. By grace you've been saved, and raised us up with him, co-raised with Christ, so co-regenerated and co-raised and seated us with him in the heavenly places. This is this compound verb that literally is like it's a synergy there. It's the Greek word even more, we get our word synergy. It's the idea that we are co-made alive with Christ, co-raised with Christ, co-seated with Christ. This is our union with Christ. And what this tells you is that God did this on your behalf. Even when he was raising Jesus from the dead, he was doing something in his chosen ones before they ever existed. Wow. But then you get to verse 7. So that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. Is he going to be showing us that kindness forever? Absolutely. But what this is pointing to is this. He is going to be showing how great the riches are of his kindness toward us in Christ is. The idea is that this is our blessing that God has given us, but even more, this is eternal glorification of God. That God is going to be eternally glorified for bestowing upon us his endless and limitless grace and kindness. And what this verse is telling us, verse 7 is telling us, all of creation is going to praise the glories of God's grace forever for what he has done in saving sinners. And we are going to experience it more deeply, more fully. It's like a well that never runs dry. It's like the source that never is ending. And it's like looking down into Lake Tahoe. It's how clear it is. You can see the depths, but you can't see all the way down to the bottom. That we will be experiencing forever in eternity more and more of the glory of God's grace in Christ. This is so hard for us to understand because we live here in the shallow lands and under the shadow in the valley of the shadow of death, as it were. And one day we will be with Jesus forever. But how does this grace touch your heart? I've been thinking a lot about this. How does this grace touch my heart? I found that it recalibrates my heart such that I fix my attention on God's initiating and sustaining work. That's what it does to me. It recalibrates me such that my attention starts getting fixed upon what God has initiated and what God sustains. And what I find is when I get to that place and I enjoy that glorious grace, that my heart doesn't strive for acceptance. It rests in dependence. That then I don't put my hopes on my ability to keep holding on to Christ, but on God's ability to do immeasurably more than I could ask or think. So it recalibrates me to just focus on what God's initiated and sustained. But also it refocuses me on God's eternal pleasures. Like just thinking about God's eternal pleasures. And what happens when I do that is then I see the best earthly pleasures are merely a distant glimpse of future glory. I see them in perspective, and then I see sinful pleasures for what they really are. They are, unmasked imposters that are rivaling a throne that is not theirs to claim. So it refocuses me on God's eternal pleasures. And then it does one other thing. It just recalibrates, refocuses me such that I rejoice in good and reject evil because I'm reminded of future glory. This is what future glory can do for you today. That as you ruminate on grace, it leads to a renewed heart. That His grace can even clean up your heart and mind. That it has that effect on your life, even the outputs of your life, such that your words become more gracious as you think deeply about God's grace and what He has done in initiating and sustaining your salvation. Your words can become more gracious, and even your correspondence, your communication, more careful. You're more careful with your words that you print or that you type up or that you send to people, that you speak voice right as I do so often. But grace does that to our heart, and then it shows in the life. Glorious grace.